The impossible task commander Velak Thoresh stood in the shadow of the greatest warship ever built by his people. The star piercer stretched across 3 kilometers of the ancient shipyard, its hull black as deep space and covered in the sacred, silver markings of the Zephyrian Empire. For 874 years it had been nothing more than a monument to past glory. Today, it needed to become their salvation. Velak's 4 arms crossed over his chest, a gesture of deep concern among his kind. His blue scales rippled with nervous energy as he studied the massive vessel. The ship had been the pride of Emperor Korith the Great, built when the Zephyrian Empire ruled half the galaxy. Its quantum fusion drives could bend space itself, allowing travel between star systems in hours rather than months. The weapon systems could crack planets in half. Most importantly, it carried the sacred crown of stars, the symbol that proved legitimate rule over all Zephyrian colonies. High Chancellor Vex approached from behind, her ancient footsteps echoing through the empty hangar. At over 300 years old, she was the oldest Zephyrian alive. Her scales faded to pale silver with age. Her 6 eyes, once brilliant purple, now appeared clouded with worry. "The outer colonies have made their demand clear," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "If the Star Piercer cannot lead the Unity fleet in 7 days, they will declare independence. Governor Krex of the Outer Rim has already begun gathering support. He claims that if we cannot awaken our greatest symbol of power, then we are too weak to deserve their loyalty." Velak's tail lashed with frustration. The political situation had been growing worse for months. After the recent war with the hegemony, many colonies questioned whether the central government still possessed the strength to protect them. The Unity Fleet ceremony happened only once every century, when all Zephyrian ships would gather to renew their oaths of loyalty. Without the Starpiercer leading them carrying the crown of stars, the ceremony would be meaningless. "What do our engineers report?" Velak asked, though he already knew the answer. Chancellor Vex's expression darkened. "Chief Engineer Nix has tried everything. The quantum cores are completely dead. The power distribution networks have degraded beyond repair. The navigation systems use technology we no longer understand. She estimates it would take 50 years just to decode the ancient programming languages." They walked closer to the ship. Up close, its size was overwhelming. The hull rose above them like a metallic mountain. Maintenance platforms and scaffolding surrounded it, evidence of the desperate repair attempts over recent months. Hundreds of Zephyrian engineers had worked day and night, but the ship remained as lifeless as a tomb. "Chief Engineer Nix believes the task is impossible," Chancellor Vex continued. "She has recommended that we use a modern flagship for the ceremony instead. But you know as well as I do that the colonies will never accept that. They want to see the Starpiercer fly, or they want new leadership." Velak nodded grimly. "Governor, Krex was ambitious and clever. He had spent years convincing the outer colonies that the central government was weak and outdated. The Starpiercer challenge was perfect for his purposes. If they succeeded, he could claim it proved nothing. If they failed, it would prove his point about weakness." A soft chime from Velak's communication device interrupted his thoughts. "Commander," came the voice of his aide, Lieutenant Zara. "The human representative has arrived." Velak and Chancellor Vex exchanged glances. 3 weeks ago, in desperation, they had reached out to the Human Federation for assistance. Humans were still considered a young species by galactic standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries earlier. But they had earned a reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems through methods that other species found baffling. "Send her in," Velak replied. Minutes later, a small figure entered the vast hangar. Sarah Chen was typical for her species, standing barely 1.7 meters tall with short black hair and wearing a practical jumpsuit covered in tool belts. She carried a large kit bag over one shoulder and walked with the confident stride of someone who had seen many broken machines in her lifetime. What struck Velak immediately was how calm she appeared. Most visitors to the shipyard were overwhelmed by the Starpiercer's size and the importance of their mission. This human simply looked at the ship with the same expression someone might use to examine a broken transport shuttle. "Commander Thoresh," Sarah said with a respectful nod. Her voice carried a slight accent from the New Singapore colony. "Thank you for requesting human assistance. I'm Sarah Chen, Senior Engineer with the Federation Salvage Corps." "Ms. Chen," Velak replied, studying her carefully. "I must be honest. Our best engineers have declared this task impossible. What makes you believe humans can succeed where we have failed?" Sarah smiled, and Velak noticed it reached her eyes in a way that suggested genuine confidence rather than empty bravado. "Commander, humans have a saying, if it was built by someone, it can be fixed by someone else. We might not understand your technology, but we understand machines. Every machine, no matter how advanced, follows basic principles. Energy flows from one place to another. Moving parts wear out and need maintenance. Systems fail in predictable ways." Chancellor Vex stepped forward. "With respect, Engineer Chen, this ship uses quantum fusion cores and crystalline computation matrices. These are not simple mechanical devices. No disrespect intended, Chancellor, but from my perspective, they are." Sarah set down her kit bag and began pulling out tools that looked primitive compared to Zephyrian equipment. "I've spent my career working on salvaged ships from dozens of species. Altarian crystalline networks, vegan quantum processors, even some pre-war hegemony vessels. The technology changes, but the problems are usually the same. Power isn't getting where it needs to go, or moving parts are stuck, or control systems are getting confused signals." She walked toward the ship, craning her neck to take in its massive hull. "The Salvage Corps sent me because I specialize in dead ships. Vessels that have been drifting in space for centuries, or buried on planets, or abandoned in asteroid fields. Last year I brought a 400-year-old Centaurian heavy cruiser back to life using nothing but spare parts and determination." Velak watched her examine the ship's exterior with a practiced eye. She wasn't using any scanning equipment or diagnostic tools. Instead, she was looking at access panels, studying the way hull sections joined together, and running her hands along conduit pathways visible on the surface. "The first thing I need to understand," Sarah said, "is what happened to make her stop working. Ships this size don't just die of old age. Something specific went wrong, and that's where we start fixing it." Chief Engineer Nix chose that moment to arrive, her 8 legs carrying her quickly across the hangar floor. Like all Zephyrians, she had evolved from spider-like ancestors, and her species excelled at mechanical work requiring multiple appendages. She had spent the last 3 months trying to resurrect the Starpiercer, and the failure clearly frustrated her. "Commander," she said, ignoring Sarah entirely, "I must protest this waste of time. We should be preparing alternative plans for the Unity Fleet ceremony, not entertaining impossible schemes." Sarah stepped forward with her hand extended in the human gesture of greeting. "You must be Chief Engineer Nix. I'm Sarah Chen. I'd love to hear your assessment of the ship's condition." Nix reluctantly shook the offered hand with one of her smaller appendages. "The ship is dead, Engineer Chen. The quantum fusion cores have been inert for nearly 9 centuries. The power distribution networks have suffered complete crystalline decay. The navigation and control systems use programming languages that predate modern Zephyrian computer science by centuries. We lack both the technical knowledge and the replacement parts to repair any of these systems." "That does sound challenging," Sarah agreed cheerfully. "But before we worry about the advanced systems, let's make sure the basics are working. Can you show me the main power distribution center?" For the next several hours, Sarah followed Nix through the ship's interior. The Starpiercer was like a city inside, with corridors wide enough for vehicles and chambers that could hold thousands of crew members. Everything was built on a scale designed to impress and intimidate. Even the maintenance areas were grand and imposing. But Sarah noticed details that the Zephyrian engineers had overlooked. She pointed out corrosion patterns on power cables that suggested specific failure points. She identified areas where environmental seals had failed, allowing moisture to damage sensitive equipment. Most importantly, she began mapping the ship's power flow in her mind, treating it like a vast electrical circuit rather than advanced alien technology. "The quantum fusion cores are the heart of the problem," Nix explained as they stood in the massive engine room. The cores themselves were sealed behind transparent aluminum barriers, looking like giant metallic eggs covered in warning symbols. They've been completely inert for centuries. Even if we could restart them, the power distribution network has degraded too far to carry the energy. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. What if we don't try to restart them? What if we bypass them entirely? Impossible, Nix replied immediately. This ship requires enormous power levels. No alternative system could provide enough energy. Maybe not to run everything at once, Sarah admitted. But what if we only powered the systems we absolutely need? Just enough to fly her to the Unity fleet ceremony? The idea was so simple that it had never occurred to the Zephyrian engineers. They had been trying to restore the ship to full operational status, as it had been centuries ago. Sarah was suggesting something much more limited but potentially achievable. As they continued the tour, Sarah's questions revealed a different way of thinking about the problem. While Nix focused on the sophisticated systems that made the star Piercer superior to modern ships, Sarah concentrated on basic functionality. Could the ship fly? Could it maneuver? Could it broadcast communication signals? Everything else was secondary. By the end of the day, Sarah had filled several notebooks with sketches and observations. She had identified dozens of potential solutions that the Zephyrian engineers had dismissed as too primitive or inelegant. To her, elegance mattered less than results. I'll need 3 days to develop a repair plan, she told Commander Velak as the day shift ended. I want to study your technical databases and understand how your modern systems work. If I'm going to bypass the ancient technology, I need to know what replacement systems are available. Velak found himself feeling something he had not experienced in months: hope. The human's confidence was infectious, and her practical approach made sense in a way that pure technical expertise had not. Perhaps the key to awakening the Star Piercer lay not in understanding its advanced systems, but in working around them. As Sarah settled into her temporary quarters, she opened a secure communication channel to Earth. Captain Torres, her old mentor in the salvage corps, appeared on the screen. His weathered face broke into a familiar grin when he saw her. Sarah, how's the impossible job going? About as impossible as usual, she replied. But I think I see a path forward. This ship isn't different from the others we've worked on, just bigger and older. The Zephyrians have been overthinking it. They usually do, Torres agreed. Advanced species tend to make things more complicated than they need to be. What's your plan? Sarah looked out her window at the Star Piercer, its hull illuminated by work lights that made it look like a sleeping giant. Same as always, Captain. Find what's broken, fix what we can, and work around what we can't. This ship is going to fly again. The next morning would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, Commander Velak allowed himself to believe that the impossible might be possible after all. The Awakening Protocol Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display, showing the Star Piercer's complete technical specifications. 3 days of intensive study had given her a deep understanding of both the ship's original design and its current condition. Around her, Zephyrian engineers worked at their stations, most still skeptical of the human's unconventional approach. The quantum fusion cores are elegant but overcomplicated, Sarah explained to Commander Velak and Chief Engineer Nix. Her fingers danced across the hologram, highlighting different ship sections. They were designed to power everything at maximum capacity simultaneously, but we don't need maximum capacity. We just need enough power to fly. She manipulated the display to show the ship's power distribution network. Your ancestors built redundancy into every system. There are backup power conduits, emergency generators, and auxiliary systems throughout the ship. Individually, they're not powerful enough to run the Star Piercer. But if we link them together, Nix's 6 eyes studied the proposed power flow Sarah had mapped out. You want to create a completely new electrical grid using backup systems? Exactly. Think of it like emergency lighting in a building. When the main power fails, backup systems can still provide basic functionality. Sarah pulled up another section of the hologram. Your modern fusion generators are much smaller than the quantum cores, but they're also more efficient. If I install 12 of them in series, we can generate about 60% of the ship's original power output. 60% might not be enough, Commander Velak pointed out. The Starpiercer was designed to maintain artificial gravity, life support, propulsion, and defensive systems simultaneously, which is why we're going to cheat, Sarah said with a grin. We only power what we absolutely need when we need it. During the Unity Fleet ceremony, the ship just has to fly in formation and look impressive. We don't need weapons, we don't need full artificial gravity, and we don't need life support for more than a skeleton crew. Over the following days, Sarah worked with increasing urgency. The Unity Fleet ceremony was only 4 days away, and Governor Krex had sent another message demanding proof that the Starpiercer would participate. Political tensions throughout the Zephyrian Empire were reaching a breaking point. Sarah's first major breakthrough came when she gained access to the ship's central core. The quantum fusion reactors sat in a chamber the size of a cathedral, surrounded by machinery that hummed with residual energy, even after centuries of inactivity. But Sarah wasn't interested in the reactors themselves. She was studying the power distribution hub, where all electrical systems connected. Chief Engineer Nix, she called through her communicator. I need you to see this. When Nix arrived, Sarah was standing knee-deep in an access pit, surrounded by cables as thick as her arm. She had removed several panel covers, revealing the intricate network of connections that carried power throughout the ship. The quantum cores aren't completely dead, Sarah announced. Look at these readings. She held up a simple voltmeter, a tool so basic that Nix had to think for a moment to remember what it measured. There's still residual energy in the system. Not enough to power anything significant, but enough to tell us that the cores are sleeping, not dead. Nix examined the readings with professional interest. But even if the cores retain some energy, we have no way to fully restart them. The startup sequence requires technology we no longer possess. We don't need to fully restart them, Sarah replied. We just need to wake them up enough to stabilize the power grid. Think of it like jump-starting an old vehicle. You don't need the engine to run perfectly, you just need enough power to get it started. Sarah's plan was beginning to take shape. Instead of trying to restore the Starpiercer to full functionality, she would create a hybrid system. Modern Zephyrian generators would provide the primary power, while the ancient quantum cores would act as stabilizers and boosters. The ship wouldn't perform like it had centuries ago, but it would fly. The work was exhausting. Sarah spent 18-hour days crawling through maintenance tunnels, installing new power conduits and bypassing failed systems. The Zephyrian engineers who had initially dismissed her began to respect her determination and ingenuity. Unlike their own approach, which focused on understanding every detail before proceeding, Sarah worked intuitively, making dozens of small improvements that gradually brought dead systems back to life. On the second day, emergency lighting flickered on throughout several sections of the ship. On the third day, artificial gravity stabilized in the command center. Each small victory built momentum and convinced more Zephyrians that the impossible might be achievable. But the real test came when Sarah attempted to access the ship's central computer core. The command center was located at the heart of the Starpiercer, surrounded by layers of security that had protected it for centuries. When the blast doors finally opened, they revealed a chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The command center was a perfect sphere, 50 meters in diameter, with surfaces covered in crystalline displays and control interfaces. At the center hung the captain's station, accessible by walkways that extended from all directions. Everything was built from materials that seemed to glow with their own inner light. This was where emperors had once commanded fleets that could conquer star systems. But Sarah's attention was drawn to something more practical, the master control panel that governed all ship functions. The displays were dark, the controls unresponsive, and diagnostic readings showed complete system failure. This was where her plan would succeed or fail. The central computer uses quantum processing matrices, Chief Engineer Nix explained. They're incredibly sophisticated but also incredibly fragile. After 8 centuries without maintenance, they've degraded beyond any hope of repair. Sarah studied the control interfaces with intense concentration. The crystalline displays and neural connection ports were far beyond any technology she had worked with before. But underneath all the sophistication, she recognized familiar patterns. Input systems, processing units, output displays, and control mechanisms. The components were alien, but the logic was universal. "What if we don't try to repair the quantum matrices?" she asked. "What if we bypass them with something simpler?" "Bypass them with what?" Nix demanded. "The ship's control systems require quantum-level processing speeds. Nothing else could handle." "The computational load?" Sarah smiled and opened her toolkit. From inside, she pulled out a device that looked impossibly primitive compared to the crystalline technology around them. A standard human computer module, about the size of a book, and designed for basic ship operations. "This won't replace the quantum matrices," she admitted, "but it can handle basic flight controls, navigation, and communication. For the Unity fleet ceremony, that's all we need." The next 12 hours were the most intense of Sarah's career. Working with Nix and a team of volunteer engineers, she carefully disconnected the failed quantum processing systems and began installing human-compatible interfaces. The work required incredible precision, as a single mistake could damage systems that were irreplaceable. But slowly, impossibly, the command center began to come alive. Display screens flickered with data. Control interfaces responded to touch. Most importantly, the central navigation system established a connection with modern Zephyrian positioning satellites. "By the ancestors," Commander Velak whispered as he watched status lights illuminate across the command center. "It's actually working." The final test came at midnight on the day before the Unity fleet ceremony. Sarah sat in the captain's chair, her hands trembling slightly as she initiated the startup sequence she had programmed. Around the command center, Zephyrian engineers watched in tense silence. "Beginning primary power initialization," Sarah announced. Throughout the ship, her hybrid power grid came online. Modern fusion generators hummed to life while the ancient quantum cores stirred from their centuries-long sleep. Power flowed through newly installed conduits, bypassing failed systems, and bringing essential functions online. Artificial gravity stabilizing, life support nominal, navigation systems active. Each announcement brought cheers from the watching engineers. But the real test was still to come. "Initiating propulsion systems," Sarah continued. Deep within, the Starpiercer, engines that had been silent for 874 years began to warm up. The process was slow and careful, as Sarah gradually increased power levels while monitoring hundreds of system readings. The ship shuddered slightly as the engines reached minimum operating power. Through the viewports, they could see maintenance, platforms automatically retracting as the ship's systems recognized the startup sequence. "Propulsion systems nominal," Sarah announced. "We're ready for flight operations." Commander Velak activated his communicator with hands that shook with emotion. "Control tower, this is the Starpiercer requesting launch clearance." The response came immediately, filled with excitement and disbelief. "Starpiercer, you are cleared for launch. All ships stand clear. The flagship is moving." Sarah engaged the maneuvering thrusters with gentle precision. The massive ship lifted from its cradle for the first time in centuries, rising slowly and majestically toward the hangar bay doors. Emergency klaxons sounded throughout the space station as automated systems responded to the unprecedented event. As the Starpiercer cleared the hangar and entered open space, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The ship moved smoothly and responsively, its hybrid systems functioning exactly as she had designed them. They had done it. The impossible had become possible. "Engineer Chen," Commander Velak said formally, "on behalf of the Zephyrian Empire, I thank you. You have accomplished what our greatest minds declared impossible." Sarah smiled as she watched the other ships of the Unity fleet forming up around them. In the distance, she could see vessels from every corner of the Zephyrian Empire, their crews undoubtedly amazed to see the legendary Starpiercer leading them once again. "Commander," she replied, "in my experience, the impossible just takes a little longer to figure out." The Unity fleet ceremony proceeded flawlessly. The Starpiercer flew in perfect formation, its presence alone enough to silence the political opposition that had threatened the Empire. Governor Kreck sent a formal message of congratulation and withdrew his demands for independence. But for Sarah, the greatest reward came from a simple message she received from Captain Torres back on Earth. Another impossible job completed. The IC Salvage Corps is proud of you. As the ceremony concluded and the Starpiercer returned to its berth, Sarah began preparing for her journey home. The ship would require extensive additional work to become fully operational again, but that was a project for Zephyrian engineers. She had proven what needed to be proven, that human ingenuity and determination could accomplish miracles. Chief Engineer Nix approached her as she packed her tools. Engineer Chen, I owe you an apology. I believe this task was truly impossible. You have taught me that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Sarah shook Nix's hand warmly. Chief Engineer, your people built something incredible 8 centuries ago. All I did was help you remember how to use it. The Starpiercer was always capable of flying again. She just needed someone to believe it was possible. As her transport shuttle prepared for departure, Sarah looked back at the Starpiercer one final time. The ancient warship sat in its berth, no longer a monument to past glory but a symbol of renewed hope. Political crisis had been averted, an empire had been preserved, and 2 species had learned to work together toward a common goal. But most importantly, another impossible job had been completed, proving once again that human determination could overcome any obstacle. The Starpiercer would fly for centuries to come, carrying with it the legacy of a small human engineer who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible.